All right, we are back. Well, I guess this is the first chapter maybe that we're doing for online stuff. Well, it's actually supposed to be the second chapter, but I'm trying to do some of this stuff quickly towards the end of the semester, the first half of the semester. But chapter number 17, this one is going to be the program design for resistance training, and really start going into the steps that are involved in some of this. The needs analysis, which is the big one, the needs analysis. What the actual sport is, what's the biomechanics of the specific movements, what muscles are going to be involved, and how they are going to be used. So is it going to be anaerobic, aerobic? Is it mostly a very powerful strength application to it? Something like a high jump or something that's really quick? Or is it more long distance and more aerobic? Or is it maybe something in between? Who knows? So we start getting into some of those concepts. Also, what types of exercises in terms of the core exercises, the assistant exercises, what determines that, what order the exercises should be in, the training load, the training volume, as well as maybe some of the rest periods and things like that. So without any further ado, I always screw that up somehow. But anyway, if you have any questions, just let me know and I will see you at the very end. I hope. Enjoy. Chapter number 17, Program Design for Resistance Training. So some of the principles of anaerobic exercise prescription, in terms of the resistance training program design variables, we're going to be looking at the needs analysis, exercise selection, what types of exercises, maybe even exercise order, the training of frequency, as well as the loads and the repetitions that are necessary for the specific goals of that individual, and the total volume, and then overall the rest periods as well. Depending upon what the goal is, the rest periods could vary a little bit. So let's start off and talk about the needs analysis. This is essentially what the goal is, the overall goal of the training program. So there's a two-stage process here. And it's the evaluation of the requirements and the characteristics of the particular sport that somebody may be in. Is it anaerobic? Is it aerobic? Is it maybe a combination of the two? Is it somewhere in that glycolysis stage where it's not necessarily a full aerobic exercise, but it's not truly an anaerobic exercise? It's kind of that in-between area. So maybe trying to build up some more lactate threshold. Then also the assessment of the athlete themselves. Where are they starting off at? What type of pre-training experience do they have? So first off, looking at the evaluation of the sport itself, looking at the movement analysis, and this is where some of the biomechanical analysis can come into play, where you're looking at the body and limb movement patterns, and also what muscles are actually involved in that particular exercise or particular sport, I should say. And what are the actual movements? How are those muscles being hit in terms of being activated, and what types of motions, either internal, external rotation, flexion, extension, all that stuff. And some of that may change within the sport itself. When you look at some sports, there's going to be some variances between different positions. If you think of something like soccer or field hockey or even ice hockey, the goalie is going to have a completely different type of movement skills than somebody who is playing out in the middle of the field or of the ice. I'm not exactly sure of the positions in some of those sports. I never played them, so I'm not really up on exactly what those are called. But the goalie, I know, is going to have completely different training aspects. Also, the physiological analysis of the athlete themselves, the strength, the power, hypertrophy. How big should they be getting? What types of muscular endurance should they have, if much of any? Maybe it could be a purely anaerobic activity. And then also the analysis of injuries and the incidence of those injuries. So the common sites of the joints and the muscles that tend to be injured in that sport, and trying to build those areas to try to limit the injury. And that's really the main reason why we weight train. The performance factor is secondary. We talk about the assessment of the athlete. So what is their training status? What type of training program are they under currently or have been under in the past? What is the length of the recent regular participation in that particular training program? Is it a week? Is it a month? Is it multiple years? That's going to make a huge difference moving forward. And what was the intensity of that particular training program? Was it really intense? Was it more high volume versus high intensity? And what was the exercises that they were performing? They involve a lot of technique. Was it a lot of maybe Olympic lifts that involve some technique and some training along with just the technique itself? Or was it just some of the basics, bench, squat, maybe some deadlift thrown in there, and some of the single joint exercises? Table 17.1 kind of breaks some of this down in terms of the examples of classifying resistance training status. When we look at a beginner, we're really trying to say that these people have been training for less than 2 months, maybe 3 months at the most. For someone who's intermediate, they've been training for the past 3 to 6 months, maybe 2 to 6 months or so. And the advanced individual is going to be training for more than 1 year. Now, the frequency also plays a role in this. If they're only training once a week or a couple times per week, they're really a beginner, possibly in that intermediate stage, potentially, but most of the time the intermediate athletes are probably going to be training 3, maybe 4 times a week, as well as the advanced or well resistance trained athletes. They're certainly going to be training at least 3 times per week, likely 4 or 5 times per week. Diving into some of the physical testing and evaluation for the athletes, and this is, again, still part of the needs analysis. This is that second part of the needs analysis, is the test should be relating to the athlete's sport. So, for instance, and I gave the example in class multiple times, if someone is training for football, having them run a marathon may not necessarily be the best test to determine what their strength and what their speed and agility is. So it needs to fit the sport itself. Mostly some sort of anaerobic test needs to go with an anaerobic type of sport, and an aerobic test needs to go with an aerobic type of sport. Some of this should be somewhat obvious, but some of these lines get blurred a little bit, especially with maybe some of the intermediate stuff, basketball, soccer, field hockey. There's a little bit of combination of anaerobic and aerobic, but still fitting the test to those specific sports and trying to work the same muscles, the same muscle groups in similar actions to what they'll be doing out on the field or the court. And then you can compare these results to some sort of normative data. And some of that normative data can actually be national. You can actually have big charts of this stuff available, or it could be within a team. You're looking at the best person on the team, or the best person that is trying out for that one position. Which one is a little bit better than everybody else? So we're trying to find the athlete's strengths and the weaknesses in this case. So the primary resistance training goal, other than trying to reduce the incidence of injury, is to typically try to improve strength, power, hypertrophy, or muscular endurance. And this is going to be different for each individual. Some people might need to just increase their overall brute strength. Some might need to increase their power. Others, it might just be they just need to get bigger. They need to increase their hypertrophy. Now, some of the strength and power is going to go along with that. And then there's some athletes that are going to need to increase their muscular endurance. And the training should fit those goals. And also trying to concentrate on one training outcome, whether it be strength, power, hypertrophy, muscular endurance, per season. If you're trying to combine a lot of them, it's going to get a little bit difficult. Maybe not so much with, if they're increasing strength and power, likely the hypertrophy is going to occur. And the same thing with if someone's trying to increase power, their overall strength should increase as well. Not always, but should. But with the muscular endurance, that one's going to be a little bit more difficult, mostly because depending upon the type of training, they may get fatigued a little bit too quickly if they're really just focusing on strength. Now, table 17.2, we've got an example of the general training priorities by the sports season. And some of this plays into what is known as periodization. There are books written on it, lots and lots of research on this. Basically, you're trying to change the volume and the intensity of the training actually in the weight room because of the limited time that someone may have actually during the season, or at least different parts of the season, because of the time that's dedicated to that specific sport, to some of the drills that they're going to be going through to improve them in the actual sport, not just the training session. So in the off season, if you can see here, we're going to have a low training sport practice, and the resistance training is going to be high. So there's a lot of time that's going to be dedicated to that resistance training. In the preseason, we're about the same. And then during the season, the actual sport practice, there's a lot of time that's going to be dedicated to that. And the fact that we have games and competitions that are going to be going on. So we have less time that is now available for the resistance training itself. So that is going to be very difficult to get them into the weight room and keep the strength, the power, muscular endurance, whatever it might be, up. So some of that maintenance. Again, maintenance, sometimes that is a 4-letter word to strength and conditioning coaches, but maintenance is still better than decreasing. So still trying to maintain some of those gains that they had in the off season and during the preseason, and continuing those through the season. Always still trying to improve, but knowing that the maintenance is still much better than some sort of decrement, And then in the postseason, this is going to be variable, just depending upon what the specific goals are, or maybe even how quick the new season is going to be coming around. Some of that could be a little bit variable in terms of what the time availability is going to be. Some of that too is after the season, immediately after the season, there's probably going to be some sort of active rest period where they're maybe doing some sort of activity, but it's lower intensity, might be lower volume, and then starting to build it up after a couple weeks and getting it back up to a high volume of resistance training. And again, this is referred to as periodization. Again, you can read more about this. There's a little bit of controversy into some of this, but for the most part, I mean, it makes sense. You just have time that is available, a certain set of time, and you only have a certain time, a certain amount of time throughout the day. We all kind of go through that, and you have to dedicate and time manage and change the intensity of the actual training session so that you can maximize the time that is available. Now, exercise selection. This is step number 2. Choosing the exercises for a resistance training program requires knowing, and these are important, the movement and muscular requirements of the actual sport. So looking into maybe some of the biomechanics and the kinesiology behind it, the athlete's exercise technique experience in terms of what exercises are they familiar with, and the equipment availability. That's a huge one. If some gyms don't have the equipment that is maybe necessary, then trying to possibly purchase that, or if it's not available, trying something else that is maybe similar to it. So if they don't have, a leg press machine for whatever reason, or if they don't have something to maybe isolate some of the single joint muscle actions that you're going to have, maybe isolating the triceps or whatever it might be, then maybe coming up with some dumbbell exercises. If there's not dumbbells available, what else is available? Are there some body weight exercises that could be used, or maybe some strength band exercises? Now, a lot of this is going to come down to pure money, how much is going to be able to be purchased and all that stuff. So, you can see some gyms, man, they are just decked out, man. They got everything that you'd need. And other places, it's, you're scraping. You got maybe dumbbells that go up to 40 pounds, maybe 50 pounds. For most athletes, that's probably going to be okay. But for a lot of athletes, you're going to need some of those heavier dumbbells. You're going to need a lot more barbells, especially if you have a bigger team or individuals in the weight room. So equipment availability could be a limiting factor here. and also the amount of training time that is available. And it goes back to the periodization and what time of the season it may be. Now, you got two types of exercises, two general types of exercises, and these are the core and the assistant exercises. Now, the core exercises, we're not necessarily saying the core itself, like the abdominals, but these are the core of the program itself. These are the main exercises, and these are the ones that are usually performed first. So they recruit one or more large muscle mass areas and more than one joint. So they're multi-joint exercises. They tend to receive the priority because there's usually a direct application between these exercises and the particular sport, such as a bench press or a squat or a deadlift. These are multi-joint exercises. We're taking large muscle groups and activating them. And these are going to translate much better to a specific sport and sport movement than maybe some of the assistance exercises like a bicep curl or a tricep extension. Not to say that those aren't important, because you can really isolate some of the muscles and focus in on some of the weak spots, but they're not necessarily the most important ones in terms of the actual application to the specific sport. Some of those assistant exercises can really help to try to strengthen some muscles that may be a little bit weak and help to reduce some of those injuries. So they are considered less important, but they still improve sport performance, just maybe not to the extent of a core exercise. And the sport-specific exercises, these are more similar to the training activity to the actual sport movement. So it's more of a transfer to that particular sport. And this is referred to as specificity, or also known as the SAID principle, or specific adaptation to imposed demands. So choosing an activity that is specifically designed to train the muscles in the direct way that a sport is going to be utilizing those muscles. It goes down to the actual movement itself, the particular muscles, the joint movement, as well as the intensity. Is it more aerobic or anaerobic? So that's very key as well. Step number 3, training frequency. So this is usually in 1 week. How many times per week are they going to be training during these sessions? And that's a pretty easy concept. Most of the time we go, how many training sessions per week? The body needs some rest, some sort of rest. Table 17.4 definitely exemplifies this. For a beginner, 2 to 3 sessions per week is pretty good. Sometimes it might just be 1 to 2, especially if they're a real beginner. And even maybe if they're a younger athlete, prepubescent, we'll run into the training aspects of children. Some of that stuff, maybe, or some of those individuals may need to be training maybe 1 or 2 times per week, at least the first few weeks, just to get used to some of the exercises, and then maybe bumping it up to 2 to 3 sessions per week. Someone intermediate starting to train more that 6-month and more range, 3 to 4 sessions per week. And somebody who's advanced, more than likely, they're going to be training at least 4 to 6 sessions per week. Now, here's the thing, and I mentioned this in class, is this number 7. This one can be, a little bit confusing because there still needs to be a rest period. At least in my view and all the data that I've seen, training 7 days per week probably isn't the best thing. I mean, there might be some certain circumstances where 7 days per week is okay. But most of the time you need a day off. Everybody needs a day off once in a while. And likely, a lot of people just take Sunday off. It could be a Saturday, could even be a Monday. Doesn't matter. As long as there's a day off where there's no training involved, it could be maybe some light training. It could be maybe some stretching exercises, some yoga, whatever it might be. But some light, very light activity that's not as intense as the normal training sessions should be. So taking at least 1 day off is likely beneficial, even for the advanced athletes. Now, during the sports season, the amount of time is going to limit the resistance training time. So in the off season, it may be 4 to 6 days per week. Preseason, start to bring it down a little bit to 3 or 4 days per week. Once they're in season, it might only be a couple times per week that they're actually able to get into the gym. And the gym, I mean the actual weight room gym. Now in the postseason, again, the active rest period, it could vary. Could be for at least 2-3 weeks, possibly maybe even a month. They're not really in the weight room training that way. They could be doing some sort of other exercises. But if they're doing some exercises in the gym, then probably a couple times per week is probably beneficial for them. And then starting to build it up to the 4 to 6 times per week in the off season. Then again, going back to the periodization aspect. Now the training frequency, we're looking at the training load and the exercise type in this case. So athletes who train with maximal or near maximal loads are going to require a little bit more recovery time before their next training session. So if they have a really hard day, they're training really intensely, they're going to need maybe a little bit more time in between to give those muscles time to remodel, to get the debris, if you will, out, and also rebuild the muscles. That protein synthesis needs to occur. And it just takes time. So some other training frequency is also influenced by overall amount of physical stress. If they have a job, especially if they're in some type of labor field, if they're in construction, if maybe they are a bricklayer or their part-time job, kind of doing drywall, whatever it might be, a lot of those types of activities are going to require more physical stress. That's going to affect some of that rest period and the muscle rebuilding that's going to be occurring. So consider the effects of other aerobic, anaerobic exercises, any sports skills or other demanding occupations that they could be taking part in. All right, exercise order. Already mentioned this at least once before. With the exercise order, the sequence should be the core and then the assistance exercises afterward. But the sequence of resistance exercises performed during one training session, that's what this is referring to. So you have the power, other, then the assistant exercises. So those power and core exercises should be performed first. So like the squat, deadlift, power clean, some of those bigger multi-joint, multi-muscular groups should be performed first, then the assistant exercises after that. You can split this up into a bunch of different ways in terms of how to go about it throughout the week. Sometimes it's upper and lower body exercises. So you have an alternating group of exercises that you're going to be performing. You'd have push-pull. So biceps, triceps, chest, back, quads, hamstrings. So you're alternating the exercises that way. Could be performing them in the same day, or you could be performing them in separate days. So every other day you're doing the push exercises and then you're doing the pull exercises the following day. Could have something like supersets, and supersets, you can combine 2 exercises that are push-pull. So do a set of bicep curls and then a set of tricep extensions, or you could do 2 of the same actual muscle group. This sometimes limits the amount of time that is spent in the gym, but also it limits the rest periods in between, which can be beneficial at times. So you have the supersets. Sometimes this is also one of the limitations here is the availability of equipment. And if there's a lot of people in the gym and you're trying to have 2 different pieces of equipment you're trying to use and they're on opposite ends of the gym, well, once you leave one area, somebody's going to think that you're done and they're going to grab it. So there could be some limitations there. There are also something known as trisets. I don't know if I've ever heard of quad sets, but I know trisets do exist because I've done them before. And a lot of bodybuilders will do them, do these as well as the supersets, in that they'll have 3 different exercises that they'll basically do one exercise, do another exercise, do another exercise, at least do a set of each, and then go back and just keep rotating through till they get 3 or 4 sets done. Most of the time, the supersets are the most common, just because it's a good way of doing the push and pull type of isolated exercises. Usually supersets aren't done with the power and core exercises. Those are mostly accomplished by themselves. And then with the assistance exercises, some of the supersets can be applied. All right, step number 5, training load and repetitions. So we're looking at the relationship between load and the repetitions. So the heavier the load, obviously the lower number of repetitions that can be performed. That's just based upon simple structural mechanics of the muscles and physiology. So the load that's commonly characterized as percentage of one repetition maximum, or could be a repetition maximum, could be multiple repetitions, could be the amount of repetitions somebody can perform 10 times, or the 10 repetition maximum. So the amount of weight someone can perform 10 times, and 10 times being that on the 10th rep, that is it. You can't go an 11th rep. No one helped you on the 10th rep. And 1 RM is just by yourself, hopefully with, with a spotter, and 1 repetition maximum, the amount of weight that you can lift 1 time. So assigning the load and repetitions based upon the training goal. So once that's decided on, the training goal can be applied to determine the actual specific load and also the repetitions via what's known as the repetition maximum continuum, a percentage of the 1 RM, or the result of that multiple repetition maximum. So you can use either some sort of extrapolation of a repetition maximum, the percentage of the actual RM, or use some sort of repetition maximum test, and then go from there, determine what the repetitions are going to be and what the actual weight is going to be for each one of those sets, and the amount of reps that someone is going to be performing. And some of these sets and reps are going to be varied depending upon what the actual training goal is going to be. And we'll see that here in a second. So figure 17.3 describes what repetition range is going to maximize the specific goal. So when we look at strength and power, we're really looking at anything less than, let's just say 7 reps. So there's the line for strength and power. Power is a little bit less, mostly because it's going to be very high weight, low reps, and you're trying to move that as quickly as possible. The strength aspect, you can move it a little bit slower if you're just trying to build overall brute strength, but anything less than 6 or 7 in this case. And then for hypertrophy, we're really looking at that 7 to 12 repetition area. And then for muscular endurance, really anything above that, but really when we're talking about muscular endurance, most of the time it's around that 15 range, 15 reps. I do know that a lot of research has gone into hypertrophy and what is the maximal, or what is the most efficient range for hypertrophy. When we look at hypertrophy, the range that actually gives the maximal hypertrophy, and this is where some of the aspects of what does it mean for these repetitions. And I'll get into that in a second, but 3 to 4 sets, 8 to 12 reps, 8 to 12 repetitions. Meaning that, say those 4 sets, it's 4 sets of 12 repetitions. Once you start getting into that 3rd and 4th set, that 12th repetition should be difficult. All right, you're trying to get to that point where that 11th and 12th rep is really, really difficult. You can still do it. And if you're not being able to finish, then you either need to get down in reps or you need to get down in weight to be able to get those, get the full amount of repetitions that are set for that particular program. Now, if it's too easy, if it's easily 12 reps, then bumping up the weight is going to be beneficial there. Table 17.9 describes a load and repetition assignments based upon the actual training goal. We look at strength. This is about 85% or greater of percentage of 1 RM and about 6 or less repetitions. For power, looking at 80 to 90% of 1 RM, at least for the single effort event, maybe 1 to 2 repetitions. And then anything that's maybe multiple repetitions, we're looking at 75 to 85% of 1 RM, 3 to 5 repetitions. Again, explosive movements in this case. For hypertrophy, it's going to be probably a little bit lower because you're doing more repetitions. And the same thing with muscular endurance. But hypertrophy, you're looking at that almost 65 to 85% range of 1 RM and 6 to 12 repetitions. Then the muscular endurance, then really anything less than 65% of 1 RM. Most of the time, the muscular endurance is performed at 50, maybe 60% of 1 RM. And anything greater than 12 repetitions, most of the time it's set at 15 repetitions, maybe up to 20, depending upon the training goal. So continuing on with step number 5 here. So assigning the repetitions based upon whatever the training goal is. So the load repetition assignments are indicated for athletes training for a single power event, such as shot put, high jump, weightlifting, could be even maybe even something like the triple jump. Something that is very quick, usually within a few seconds, it's done. But also there's going to be some multi-effort power events, such as basketball and volleyball, where there's going to be some movement, other movement, but there's also going to be some times where there's some explosive movements. Basketball, jumping for rebounding, for volleyball, obviously jumping up, spiking, blocking, whatever it might be. So whatever those training goals are, really focus in on what the sport is doing, how the athlete is going to be moving their body, and how many times they'll be moving their body, and then determining the repetitions based upon that. Now, the progression of the training load, looking at the timing load increases. So as an athlete adapts to that particular training stimulus that they're being placed upon them, the loads have to increase or there's kind of no point in it. That's the progressive overload principle. So we got, sorry for my writing here. Still getting used to writing on a device. But and my handwriting is just sloppy overall anyway, trying to get neater. Anyway, that's the progressive overload principle, where if the only way to increase is if there is a progressive overload. If someone is adapted to that particular training stimulus, they need to increase either the sets, the reps, or the weight to make any more improvements, or they're going to plateau. So monitoring each of the athletes' training and testing them every once in a while to see what see how they're doing, how they're progressing. If they are progressing, if they're not progressing, then something needs to change. If they're progressing really quickly and they're easily able to lift that weight and move it, then there needs to be an increase, usually in the weight, especially for power and strength exercises, but also possibly even the muscular endurance. If they're easily able to do those 15 or maybe 20 repetitions, then maybe bumping up the weight is going to be beneficial, not just bumping up the reps. So the quantity of load increases, how much to increase? So there's going to be some variations in training status of the athlete themselves, the volume loads, and also the exercises are going to greatly influence how much the increase should be. On average, we're looking at maybe 2.5 to 10%, depending upon a lot of things like the training status, the volume loads, the weight that is available. If you don't have enough weight that's actually there, then there needs to be something, some other increase, either the amount of reps, but that might not be conducive to power or strength exercises. Maybe some sort of chains or ropes or strength bands, something to increase the resistance that they're being placed up against. Let's look at some key terms. Usually I kind of almost Quentin Tarantino this a little bit. Usually key terms are at the very beginning of slides, but this one is at the very end. So let's look at some key terms. The actual volume, that's the total amount of weight lifted in a total training session. A set is a group of repetitions sequentially performed before the athlete stops at rest. So that's that. So a certain amount of reps in one particular small little session. Then usually there's going to be multiple sets for a particular exercise. Now, repetition volume, take the total number of repetitions during a workout. And then what's known as the volume load is the total sets multiplied by the number of reps multiplied by the number of weight lifted per rep. So for simplistic purposes, if you had a 10-pound dumbbell and you lifted it 10 times in one set, that would be 100. And then if you did 4 sets, that would be 400. So there you go. It's a simple calculation that's pretty lightweight, but that would be what an example of a volume load would be. Moving on to step number 6, the actual volume itself. So the training status. It's appropriate for an athlete to perform only 1 or 2 sets as a beginner, and then start adding sets as they become a little bit more advanced. So someone who's just starting off, maybe 1 or 2 sets, perfectly fine. And then get them up to that 3 to 4 set range, possibly even up to 5 or 6 sets, depending upon what the goal is going to be. Some of the power and strength exercises, some of the power lifters, they'll do 5 or 6, possibly even 7 sets of a particular exercise, depending upon what their training goal is. So the training volume is directly based upon the resistance training goal, like I said. So strength, we're looking at the goal repetitions of less than 6. 2 to 6 sets approximately. For the power, maybe 3 to 5 sets. Sometimes maybe even up to 6 sets. And then it's a little bit different for either single effort events or multiple effort events. We're looking at 1 to 2 reps for the single effort. And then obviously the multi-effort is going to be a little bit more than that, but probably not more than 5 or 6 repetitions. For hypertrophy, again, that 6 to 12 range. In muscular endurance, above the 12 repetitions, 2 to 3 sets. For the hypertrophy, we're looking at, again, that 3 to 6 sets. Most of the time for the hypertrophy, we're looking at maybe 3 or 4 sets, possibly 5. To be honest, I've never seen too many people who are just trying to build muscle mass and so increase hypertrophy and be doing a lot of 6-set exercises. Most of the time it's 3 to 4 sets. Sometimes you get a 5th one in there for some of the core exercises. So looking at hypertrophy and this training goal. So increases in muscular size, they are associated with higher training volumes and performing 3 or more exercises per muscle group. So you're really trying to hit the muscles from different angles, do different exercises to maximize the breakdown of the tissues and therefore the protein remodeling and increasing the muscle mass. For muscular endurance, usually involve many repetitions, obviously, and we've seen this, usually lighter loads and fewer sets, not too many fewer sets, but maybe 2 or 3 sets versus maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, depending upon whether it's hypertrophy training or power or strength. Looking at rest periods, step number 7. So this is the time that's dedicated to recovery between the sets, and this is obviously known as a rest period or sometimes referred to as an interset rest. Because when you talk about rest periods, you still need to be because when you're talking about rest periods, you might need to be a little bit specific about, is it a rest period between the sets? Is it a rest period between the exercises? Or is it a rest period between the actual days, the training sessions? So the length of this rest period is going to be dependent upon what the actual goal is of the athlete, what the relative load that was lifted, so the intensity, and also what are their status to begin with, in terms of what types of training have they done in the past or recently, but also how are they feeling that day? There are days when if you've lifted enough, if you've trained enough, you know that there are some days where you just feel like absolute garbage, and you might need a little bit more time between each set. That is maybe not conducive to the best training, but it's still better than nothing. And having maybe just a little bit more rest. I'm not talking about taking 10 more minutes between each set, but taking, an extra, 20 seconds or 30 seconds, depending upon how you're feeling. Could just be you ate something bad. It could be whatever it might be. Having that little bit of extra rest period might be beneficial to kind of keep you going and keeping the athlete going throughout the training session rather than trying to push them too hard. In table number 1712, this is looking at the rest period lengths. So for strength and power, you're looking at maybe 2 to 5 minutes. Sometimes it could be even 6 to 7 minutes, depending upon what the goal may be and how their particular training method and training style is. For hypertrophy, most of the time it's 30 seconds to a minute and a half. It doesn't, there's not a lot of rest periods with hypertrophy. Sometimes, especially if you're doing supersets, it's back to back to back to back to back exercises. So there's very little rest periods in between. Really, the rest periods for sometimes with supersets is the opposing exercise group. So however long it takes you to do bicep curls, that's the rest period between the maybe tricep extension exercises. And then for the muscular endurance, it's certainly going to be less than 30 seconds in this case as well. All right, that was chapter number 17, program design for resistance training. I'll see you in a second, or maybe not, depending upon if you're listening to this on audio, then you probably won't see me, I guess. So if not, then take care. If so, then I will see you in a second. All right, so chapter number 17. How did you like that one? That was kind of a quick one. I'm sorry. It was kind of a quick one, even though there was a lot of slides there. Some of the information you may or may not have seen before, but I would imagine you've probably at least seen it before. You may not have been able to, or maybe not have ever seen it in that particular order or defined that way. But looking at a needs analysis, I mean, that's basically what are the goals? What are the overall goals of the particular training? What are we trying to do? So having some sort of goal and knowing where we need to go is going to be very important. And then the exercise selection. What types of exercises should we actually be doing? And the athlete should be doing. That's really what we're trying to do there. And then the training frequency. How often per week? We talk about, I'm going to go 2 or 3 times per week, or I'm going to lift 4 or 5 times per week. That's what we're talking about there. For the exercise order, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time we do bench, squat, deadlift, power clean, those big exercises, almost, I won't say full body exercises, but they almost feel like full body exercises at the very beginning. And we do that because those are the core exercises. Those are the main ones. Those are the power exercises. Those are the overall strength exercises. We're multi-joint, multi-muscular group exercises. Sometimes there is some variation on that where the assistant exercises maybe are performed first to prime the muscles. But for most training sessions, for most athletics, we're really trying to focus in on those core exercises because those are the ones that are going to translate much better to the actual sport than some of the assistance exercises that are mostly just single joint, single muscle group exercises that are really focused in on one specific area of the body. Very important for maybe injury prevention and also building up some weaknesses in some of the areas of the body. But for the actual translation to sport, maybe not the greatest, but still important, still an important part of training. And then the overall volume and some of the definitions of volume and things like that towards the end, as well as rest periods and rest periods between the sets, the inter-set rest period, not necessarily the rest periods between the reps or reps. You shouldn't really have too much rest between the reps. Rest between maybe the exercises as well as the training sessions, but the rest period between the actual sets themselves. And that's going to be variable depending on what the training goal is. In most of the power and strength types of training, those rest periods are going to be much longer. Really trying to get the muscles, clear out some of the maybe lactate that has been there, and also replenish some of the ATP, or at least clear out some of the crap that has been made during a one set, and making sure the muscles are primed and ready to go full force for that next set. For hypertrophy, the rest period is really 30 seconds to a minute and a half, just enough to clear out some of the quote unquote junk or the waste that was being produced during the previous set. That way you can try to get most of the maximal effort then during the next set. And then for muscular endurance, You're really just trying to build literally the endurance of the muscles, and some of the lactate is going to be starting to build up potentially during that period of time, especially as 15, 20 repetitions, and just trying to maximize that and getting the body used to being in that kind of crappy state is like is how I like to put it, of fatigueness, but trying to work through it and trying to get the body to used to clearing some of that stuff out as quickly as possible. So the differences in rest periods are certainly going to vary depending on what the actual goal is. So not no, there is no one size fits all plan for every athlete, for every position in every sport. It really needs to be individualized. What are the individual goals of the particular person for that particular sport, for that particular position? That's it. Because there's going to be some athletes that play a particular position, and even if they have somebody the same size, weight, height, whatever it is, in the same position, in the same sport, in the same team, in the same continent, same country, same town, same high school, they're still going to have some aspect of their training that's maybe a little bit different, just because they're two completely different individuals with two completely different genetic makeups, but they are going to be responding a little bit different. So there's that principle of individuality that goes into this. Now it's going to be similar. The training is going to be similar between those two particular individuals, but there's going to be some subtle differences that they may need to go through. Some of them may have certain weaknesses than somebody else. And they might be the same size, height, and weight, but one might be 25% body fat and the other one might be 12% body fat. Well, the one that's 25% body fat may need to decrease their fat mass a little bit and increase their muscle mass, even if they're 12% body fat, both of them. One's going to have some weaknesses somewhere. Maybe their legs aren't nearly as strong as the other one. Maybe the other one has upper body strength that's a little bit better than the other person, and they need to increase their leg strength. So there's a lot of different aspects to it that, again, has to be individualized to this. It can't just be a one-size-fits-all program. That's where some of the stress, but also the funness, if you will, can come out in strength and conditioning, is that trying to train a team, but also individualize some of the programs and trying to look at some of the athletes and what their specific weaknesses are and try to fix those weaknesses, but also maximize some of their strengths. So anyway, that was the program design for resistance training chapter. Kind of a mouthful there, but if you have any questions, you have any comments, leave them down below. If you have any questions or comments in class, please don't hesitate to ask. I thank you for watching. I thank you for listening. If you were listening this on audio format, if you have any questions, just let me know. Take care, everybody.